Hello, and you are listening to Eco Justice Radio. We present environmental and climate stories from a social justice frame, featuring voices not necessarily heard on mainstream media. Welcome, I'm Jack Ide. On today's show, Beyond the Financialization of Nature and Ecology of Care, host Carrie Kim will be interviewing Didi Pershouse, author, teacher, and founder of the Land and Leadership Initiative. We also had her on the show in 2022, so look for that interview from episode 154 on our podcast. Didi Pershouse is an internationally known writer and teacher. Her focus is on the foundational role of soil structure and function, or as it's called, the soil sponge, as the best way to provide abundant water and food for all life while establishing resilience to flooding, drought, heat waves, and wildfires. She has written 2 books, The Ecology of Care, Medicine, Agriculture, Money, and the Quiet Power of Human and Microbial Communities, as well as the book Understanding Soil Health and Watershed Function. You can find her writing and interviews on The Wisdom Underground on Substack.
Aloha, this is Carrie Kim. Listeners, we are thrilled to have internationally renowned writer, teacher, and educator Didi Pershouse of the Land and Leadership Initiative and also the Wisdom Underground podcast joining us again today to talk about various essential topics: the ecology of care, or the commons of care, creating the global financialization of nature, and the choice between sterility and fertility for planetary health. These topics all loom large. Let's see how far we get. We thank the Tongva ancestors for their enduring legacy, stewardship, presence, and profound connection to this region where we live. We live on the ancestral homelands of the Tongva and all of their relatives, and we invite you to align with and support the many Native nations across Turtle Island in supporting their lifeways, continuing for future generations. Welcome back, Didi.
Great to be with you.
We are always grateful to have you sharing with us. And, our Anthropocene times continue to havoc on the natural world, of which we're an integral part. But we know that that is also the good news, because if we change our behaviors, then the destruction can stop. Many of us understand we are at the origination of much of the destruction to the climate, habitat, biodiversity, the toxicity of our air, soil, and water. I mean, we could go on and on, but most of our listeners are well versed in all of this. We're aware of what's happening. And I'm wondering if you could speak about this financialization of nature that we're dealing with. You had spoken about water being traded as a future. Also, this new asset class of natural asset companies, which has been added on the New York Stock Exchange. And it promotes the trading, right, of the value of ecosystem, quote unquote, services in forests, farms, and other lands. But you could speak more about it, because I think many people may not exactly know what that even means. They may not even know these things have happened.
Yes. And actually, interestingly, the natural asset class was proposed and was sort of full speed ahead and got knocked off. So it's kind of on hold for now. But so that's interesting, but it doesn't mean that there's any less of that activity going on. It's just that particular form of it is at least on pause for now. But yes, water started being traded as a commodity on the futures exchange. Mm-hmm. I think that was in 2019 or 2020. That basically a lot of things happened during COVID, that things got proposed.
Yes.
And including this natural asset class. And there are many well-meaning people who think that the only way that we're going to solve our crisis, our climate crisis, our biodiversity crisis, like you said, polluted soil, air, et cetera, water, who think that the only way to solve it in a capitalist society is to turn it into capital, into what's referred to as natural capital, and that people don't pay attention to things unless they have a price on them. And I think there's some truth to that in terms of people paying attention to it, but I don't think that the way to do that is through large markets. Mm-hmm. I think we do need to think about the fact that Every time we have a flood in Vermont, it costs the state or the feds, lots and lots and lots of money to repair roads and culverts and bridges, et cetera. Every time there's a wildfire in California, same thing.
Right.
But to me, having middlemen who are profiting off of
Right.
that financialization of nature is really, really a step in the wrong direction and potentially very, very dangerous. We're already seeing just horrendous things happening in the name of saving nature,
Sure.
particularly in African countries where local native folks are being prevented from living in, kicked out of their, place where they have lived forever, been working forever, been maintaining incredibly biodiverse landscapes. So North America, Africa, we're seeing people coming in and fencing off or kicking out or burning down homes, et cetera, because they say, oh, this is now carbon forest or carbon credits, et cetera.
Right. It's a justification for protecting nature, right?
Right. Yes. And there are some terms like green colonialism that are being used to describe this. There's a national and international movement to conserve 30% of the land by 2030 that's well underway. But there's this question of like, conserve it for who?
And how is it being done?
And by who? Right.
Right. Which is different than like E.O. Wilson's idea. Right. It's different than E.O. Wilson's idea of half Earth, right? Of that kind of conservation.
And so one of the things that we know and we're trying to remember is that humans do have a role to play in the ecosystem, and humans have played both beneficial and degrading roles in the ecosystem throughout history, and that we need to learn what is our role, relearn that. So we have a role just like every other thing does.
Right.
But what exactly that is the kind of the current question.
What would you say that is for yourself?
I mean, right now, it's very obvious to me what our role is, because right now, a lot of what we need to do is to start managing land in a way that invites in a much larger biological workforce that feeds and provides water and shelter for that workforce, so that the work of life can actually happen. So, for example, having a big monocropped field of corn or soy, et cetera, that is being doused with pesticides. I don't even like the word pesticides, biocides, that are basically killing off anything that doesn't fit and creating super species of like vegetarian corn and soy eating things
that are resistant to all these chemicals.
While killing off the carnivorous insects that would keep those populations in balance.
Sure.
That's obviously not our role, right? That's not our correct role.
Right.
So our correct role is like, how do we grow food for us, and while doing that, provide food and water and habitat for everything else. And we know how to do that. It's just a different way of doing things. So farmers have been for a long time told, oh, you need to get big or get out, or you need to use the latest technology, or you need these fertilizers, you need these pesticides, you'll lose your crop without it.
Right.
And so it's not really the farmer's fault that they're doing this. It's always been this sort of like best management practices, right?
Sure. And how they get their loans and their crop insurance and all this tied together. It's very incestuous.
Yeah.
So it's like a mafia.
Yes. So what we need to question is this idea that somebody else gets this huge chunk of the money or the profit, et cetera, of these practices. And that they're kind of running the show in terms of research, in terms of the universities, in terms of the extension staff, et cetera. And that, people like Elaine Ingham lost her, who was a soil biologist who had a grad student who went up against Monsanto, who was trying to create something that, the grad student proving could end food security for the entire world, because it was going to, I think, kill mycorrhizae or whatever. I can't remember the details of that story. But, then they lost their university It's because of that. So it's like,
It's starting to know how much universities are actually involved in a lot of this research, and the way that where the
yeah.
money, you follow the money is always the.
And yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Follow the money and question the money and figure out workarounds that don't involve somebody who's not even involved in the labor making
Mhm.
a huge profit. So,
Right. Yes. Yeah. Well, I wanted to also ask you, because you're deeply connected around the globe. You have worked with so many different groups and individuals around the world on regeneration and ecosystem restoration in various ways. And I'm wondering if you could share some of the things that are on your heart today that inspire you around the world that are happening. And we know there's great things happening in India. While there are destructive things happening in Africa, there's also amazing restoration happening in certain pockets of Africa as well. So if you could speak to some of the things that right now are inspiring you.
yeah, I mean, the India project is the one that I know the most about and I'm most inspired by. This is the Andhra Pradesh Community Managed Natural Farming Initiative, which was originally called the Zero Budget Natural Farming Initiative.
Mhm.
And this is now involving over 1 million farmers in the state of Andhra Pradesh. It is primarily spread through these long-standing women's self-help economic groups. So they
Mhm.
address the financial issue right at the base of it, right? So these are
Mhm.
women supporting women and women working closely together who took this on as one of their many projects
Mhm.
to spread natural farming through the villages. And it was originally called zero budget natural farming because the idea was
Mm.
instead of signing a, horrible contract for, for seeds and pesticides and,
Yes.
for herbicides, et cetera, that was leading to all these farmer suicides and tremendous debt, because
Mhm.
it was for crops that didn't even work that well a lot
Right.
of the time in that
Right.
context. So instead of doing that,
Mhm.
these farmers would experiment on a small piece of their land to start with.
Mhm.
They didn't, they wanted to make sure it would work. That they would source all of their seeds from within the village. They would use
Mhm.
biodiverse crops so that they're restoring the
Mhm.
insect and bird and animal
Right.
biodiversity through that
Right.
food web,
Oh.
right? They would use that biodiversity to attract the kinds of insects that keep plant-eating insects in check, so that
Mhm.
there's a
The
population
balance. Mhm.
dynamics. They created their own biostimulants to help revitalize the soil from
Mhm.
healthy forest soils, from animal dung and urine,
Mhm.
natural substances that are found right around
Right.
them. So
Locally. Yeah.
again, no need to spend a lot of money. They
Mhm.
used mulch that was made from the residue of other
Mhm.
crops like peanut
Mhm.
shells, etc.,
Mhm.
to help hold the moisture in the ground.
Right.
And what they found now is that farmers' incomes are sometimes doubling and tripling, and
Mhm.
they are able to grow food year round in a place that used to have a long, long, long dry season. So
Mhm.
they call it pre-monsoon dry sowing. They
Oh.
also call it 365-day green cover. To talk about a red carpet
We're
season that
envious. No.
I know. Well, and it's actually interesting for California because
Yes.
it is their climate is not dissimilar in that they have a rainy season and a dry season, which is different
Mhm.
than like where I live, where it's
Right.
wet all year round.
Right.
In Vermont, we have either
Mhm.
snow or rain. Though we, like 49 other states, were in a drought just a month ago.
Wow.
So, and what we know is that drought and floods are two sides of the same issue, that water's not
Mhm.
soaking into the ground.
Mhm.
This
Mhm.
project in India, part of the way that they're managing the land is helps to grow what I call, and Walter Yana calls, a soil sponge. That is a
Mhm.
deep soil structure that
Yes.
has a much improved function. So,
Mhm. An ability to hold water,
an
right?
ability to
And have the
to to accept water and to hold water at the
And
roots for plants.
I think they were able to really transform this in a very rapid period of time, wasn't it, Didi?
In
This
India,
project, yes, this Andhra
yeah. So
Pradesh
so
project was.
typically for each farmer, it takes about 2 years to transition.
Mhm.
But they have, I think they started in like 2017, maybe
Mhm.
2016. And now they have 1 million farmers in the state.
It's
So I
just,
think it's 1 out of every 6 farmers is now doing this in Andhra Pradesh.
that's amazing. But how is that spreading across the continent? I mean, spreading
Well,
across the country of India? Is it
so now just
different
this
states?
week,
Mhm.
Prime Minister Modi, who, it's the mixed reviews.
Mixed reviews. Yeah.
But he's announced that there's going to be a natural farming initiative across India that they're trying to get 10 million farmers across
That's,
India doing
that's
this.
amazing. Yeah.
Is that government co-opting something, or they're going to greenwash it, or where does the money go, or that kind of thing? Michael Pilarski of the Global Earth Repair just posted a email questioning some of that
Mhm.
today. But
Right.
we're also really excited because it's very exciting that what they're doing in Andhra Pradesh is being recognized nationally.
Right.
When
Right.
Walter Yena and I were there in 2019, we were over there working with the project in 2019, and I had to come home early because the air pollution was so bad that I got really, really sick. But Walter went on to go meet with the think tank for Prime Minister Modi and with a lot of water organizations, national water organizations.
Right.
So we knew even back then that they were very interested in this idea, but I think they've been kind of dancing with it since then to see, because they've had a lot of issues.
Right. Well, when you have this kind of success at the local level and the people locally are empowered and they're resilient and self-sufficient, can't be monetized. So that's where, whatever the globalists or people that are used to making money, profiting off of these very same people are uneasy, because then where are their profits? So I don't know what you see down the line for things like this one, but that's what people need to do. We need to be self-sufficient in these ways, or sufficient within our communities.
Yeah, and one of the things, Carrie, that's so interesting about this project is the health outcomes. So by getting the pesticides out of the food system, out of the waters, et cetera, out of the air, by having much more nutrient dense food that's coming out of these systems, because that's what we know is when the soil sponge develops, there's a whole ecosystem that's getting the right nutrients at the right time underground and bringing them to the plants.
Right.
They're seeing just tremendous increases in maternal health, child health, family health, et cetera, which isn't even, that's not even part of what they're talking about. But if you see that this is a kind of a side effect of it.
Right. It wasn't their primary aim. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. The women's self-help groups, that was their primary aim.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And Vijay Kumar, who was both helped found the women's self-help economic groups and helped bring this project to them, get them going with this. His overall goal in life is about the elimination of rural poverty. It's really interesting how it all has come together. And I'm sure there are people who are trying to, get carbon credits out of this, et cetera. And it's the carbon credit market that is, what we were initially talking about.
Yes.
It's the key place where people get confused.
Yeah. Didi, we're going to take a break right here and we'll come right back and talk a bit more about Andhra Pradesh and the projects happening there, and also get into the ecology of care.
Great.
You're listening to Eco Justice Radio, a listener-supported media outlet. Please consider making a donation to ensure that we can continue to provide socially and environmentally driven content. Donations can be made at ecojusticeradio.org or socal350.org. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon at patreon.com/ecojusticeradio. Today you're listening to Beyond the Financialization of Nature, an Ecology of Care, with host Carrie Kim and guest Didi Pershouse, author, teacher, and founder of the Land and Leadership Initiative.
So, Didi, if there's something more you'd like to share about the Andhra Pradesh project and the many farmers there who have taken up natural farming, is there anything else?
One of the wonderful things is that not only do they have 1 million farmers in India who are now practicing this farming that does not rely on outside inputs, anything outside of the village, basically, but
outside
they
influences.
also, which is huge in terms of local food sovereignty and resilience, et cetera.
Yes.
But they're also now being asked to bring this to other continents. So they have teaching arrangements and traveling,
Mm.
with different countries in Africa and South America, et cetera. So that's really exciting because
That is
it's
exciting.
also those communities that are very much the target of this financialization of nature of these
Sure,
carbon markets. So
sure.
there's huge, huge, huge returns being promised to
Mm-hmm.
African nations by
Uh-huh.
entering into these carbon trading
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
land.
Or
And
schemes.
and in
Like schemes.
fact, so they're being told that it's like $1 per unit when it's
Mm-hmm.
actually the current price is actually just a few cents.
Right.
And people are giving up the ability to grow food sometimes in order to plant a forest of trees that doesn't even make sense.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very wonderful Substack that's along with when you're right on Substack, you also start learning about who else is writing there.
Sure. Yes,
There's
yes, yes.
something called Red Monitor, REDD, which is
Uh-huh.
red is the carbon credit
Okay.
program. So Red Monitor, and I think his name is Chris Lang. And
Uh-huh.
there are articles every day about just
Corruption around carbon
the
credits.
incredible corruption around land use and carbon. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think you said it best is that it's kind of the guise of saving nature or protecting the climate but it's actually just more of a profit incentivization.
It's not just a profit incentivization, it's also a land grab.
Land grab. Yes.
So
Yes.
one of the reasons Africa is so targeted by this is that a lot of land in Africa there's no tenure, there's no, nobody owns it, right? It's
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
communal lands. And so
Uh-huh.
if they can say, oh, we're protecting the carbon in this communal land, then de facto ownership becomes the person who owns those carbon credits.
And is it
So,
for the land or is it more for the mineral rights underneath the land or is it just
well, it all
the land?
goes together, right? Yeah,
All of it? Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Would you say that Africa is really kind of like the hotbed of that right now? I mean, it's happening globally all over the
It's
place.
happening globally. It's even happening in the United
Oh,
States.
of course. It's
There's all this
happening in my neighborhood. I know
I mean,
exactly.
yeah, there's all this farmland turning over right
Uh,
now,
hmm.
because a lot of farmers are aging out and they
Yeah.
haven't got children who are willing to take it on because
Yeah.
the profit margin is so low because it's just a debt machine. Uh,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
and that farmland's all coming up for sale. And we know that some of the big, big, big finance people are buying up land, including things like TIAA, the Teachers Retirement Fund, which is
Mm,
a huge, huge investment fund.
mm,
They
mm.
have a big portion of their money in farmland now. That's like
Uh-huh.
their new
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
I
it's a
think,
problem. It's a
yeah.
problem.
Well, how do we undo, I think, the thing about land as an asset? So as long as
Yeah.
the land is an asset and a way to hold money or create money or generational wealth, that is problematic. We know. We had Sarah Mock on the show to talk about that, the farm and other F words, if you know her book. And she was
Yes.
talking a lot about that so many farms are actually make more money by not farming, by just keeping that real estate asset piece. That's all that they care about.
Mhm.
It's that
Mhm.
thing. But, I wanted to diverge a little bit to the ecology of care, medicine, agriculture, money, and the quiet power of human and microbial communities, which you wrote way back in 2015, which feels like a light years ago
I
now.
know. And actually, yeah,
You're like whole other lifetimes, right? But
right.
the book addresses how the germ theory of disease combined with the profit-based economy led many of us in the West down this path of sterility in medicine, agriculture, and our social lives. I think the pandemic also exacerbated this exponentially, but it also, the pandemic times also catalyzed many back to reconnect with nature. People understood something's wrong here that
Mhm.
maybe they didn't realize before. The system is broken in a way that I didn't realize. So I'm wondering if you could talk about reigniting this ecology of care as humanity is hurtling forward with technology, AI, biotech, geoengineering, transhumanism. It goes on and on. So your comments on.
Yeah, and it's an interesting time. So I wrote the book between starting in like 2006 to 2015. So it was really
Oh,
like
right,
a
right. Yeah,
long,
yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah, so it
Yeah.
was published at the
Published.
very end of
Published.
2015,
Yeah,
but it was
exactly.
reflecting my thinking for that decade before that. And now it's
Right.
been almost a decade since then.
Hmm.
And I'm
Hmm.
finding it's, you know, more relevant than ever. It's a little bit more focused on the only thing I would really change is that it has more focus on carbon than on it's still got a good focus on water, but I really don't. At
Right.
that point, I didn't
Right.
fully understand the biological climate regulation. And even when I did in 2013, 14, I was too far into the book to totally
Yeah,
it.
to redirect
So,
or add. Yeah.
so I was like, okay, we'll just, take one for
Mhm,
the team
mhm,
here. But
mhm.
what's interesting to me is how all of these themes are coming back around. So there's the theme around, sort of the germ theory of disease and our like phobia around
Mhm,
germs,
mhm,
right?
mhm, mhm,
Which
mhm.
we saw so strongly during COVID.
Of course.
And, in many ways for good reason, right? It was and is a scary disease, but the approaches to how little focus there was on immune function
Yes, natural
during
immunity.
that
Yeah.
time
Mhm.
rather than on
Right.
how do you kill it, right? Or avoid
Exactly.
it. So, and even how little, respect was given to sort of natural approaches, like
Mhm.
inhaling essential oils, like they are strong
Yeah.
antiviral. And I know
Mhm, mhm.
my friends in Mexico and other places were just
Yeah.
doing daily, steam baths
Sure.
that
Yeah.
that was actually quite protective, which I've picked that up myself as
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
an approach now.
Yeah. Well,
You know,
not turning to nature,
whatever.
there
So
wasn't a, yeah.
but the other thing that now with this recent CEO of the healthcare, right, being murdered,
Right.
and everybody suddenly talking about insurance, and that's one of the things also that is I tackle in the book is our strange inability to understand that that universal healthcare really is very different than the system that we have now, and that
Sure. Hmm.
Obamacare was not universal healthcare.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, I'm glad for some of the tweaks that were made there, but like the pre-existing
Right.
illness clause getting taken out. But we spend so much more on healthcare than other
Oh,
countries
it's
do,
insane.
and
Yeah.
our outcomes are so much worse.
Abysmal.
Uh,
Hmm. Yeah.
and it's all, so I've been republishing the chapters on Substack for free and doing an
Yes.
audio version along
Hmm.
with them. And ironically, just in the last couple of weeks, the one that I put out there was about about sort of the health industry and how the whole argument of competition
Hmm.
being something that is, works as an economic model for healthcare that if we have a competitive
Hmm.
market, it'll keep prices down. I mean, first of
Hmm.
all, we've disproven that
Right.
wildly because our
Right.
prices are much higher than anywhere
Yeah.
else. But
Skyrocketed.
also, it's
Hmm.
not it. There is no way to shop around. The prices vary,
Hmm.
whether depending on your insurance, and even the prices of drugs will vary depending on insurance. And uninsured people get a different price than insured people. So there's like
Yeah. Yeah. None of it makes sense. I mean, I
it's
think
just
part of the thing is too is that many people don't connect the dots between public health and ecosystem health. And
right.
that's where health begins, is through the ecosystem and our food systems. And so if we get back to that, all of this isn't going to matter quite as much because we won't be as sickly as many of us are in this society, especially
Yeah.
here on this continent. But you know, I also wanted to speak a little bit about the even as the regenerative movement is growing and flourishing in certain areas in certain ways, there also seems to be this dark undercurrent to remove animals and humans from the land, or to
Mhm.
eliminate meat and dairy consumption as a response to climate change, and also to lead us further down the path of sterility. Some are, as you've said, looking out in the wrong direction for our future, and it is away from nature. So
Mhm.
if you could speak a bit more about this feeling that don't I feel it's accurate.
Well, I'll speak to it from sort of the flip side of it, of what the potential is that if we really understood how living systems work, we would be taking
Hmm.
such a different approach.
Hmm.
That if we understand that our cell structure is the most basic form of intelligence in living systems, right? It decides what to take in, what to leave
Hmm.
out, and in what ratio and at what time do we need a little bit more of this, a little bit less of that.
Right.
And so in our bodies and all the bodies of all living things, we have these cells that do that. And to have a functioning cell membrane requires certain nutrients, but it also it
Right.
helps to regulate the nutrients, right? And everything, all of our function, all
Yes.
of our structure is based on that.
Mm-hmm.
Underground, the mycorrhizal fungi are like a long membrane, and
Mm-hmm.
they go out. These are fungal communities that grow into and out of plant roots and
Mm-hmm.
become an extension of the plant root underground in a
Mm-hmm.
healthy soil, right?
Right.
And they go out and search for nutrients and bring them back to the plant at the
Mm-hmm.
right time, in the right ratio, et cetera,
Mm-hmm.
so that
Yeah.
the plant has what it needs to have immunity to fungal diseases, to viral diseases, right? To chewing insects, to things that bite
Mm-hmm.
them,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right. Right.
And that's what creates that terroir, that beautiful, all of the fragrances and tastes of
Mm-hmm.
plants that are grown in healthy systems, that they have these fungal communities that are bringing in the nutrients in a certain way. And the plants
Right.
can make all of these secondary compounds that have
Mm-hmm.
so much flavor and aroma. And that's what I was talking about. Like the essential oils are
Yes.
something that's
Yes.
gathered from
Yeah.
that and that have
Yeah.
these incredible antiviral properties that were
Mm-hmm.
developed for that purpose.
Yeah.
So then grazing animals that are eating from a system, a perennial healthy system that has been managed for biodiversity, they also have these like a layer of intelligence of
Right.
learning from generation to generation what to eat when and in what order and what amount and which things to avoid and
Right.
how much, etc. So then when we have like butter or cheese or dairy or eggs or
Mm-hmm.
meat,
Mm-hmm.
etc.,
Yeah.
from animals that have been raised in very diverse communities, they have been allowed to have the long-term relationship with the land that they know what they need.
Right.
And we're eating things that come from multiple layers of intelligence into our
Yes.
body, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then our inner ecosystem, which has a microbiome and which has cell membranes and which has the mucosal membranes of our gut
Mm-hmm.
and has,
Mm-hmm.
you know, all those membranes that go
Yes.
into our other systems,
Mm-hmm.
then our system can develop all of that intelligence. And then we start making the hormones, the neurotransmitters, et cetera, that we need in order to be intelligent and to make good choices.
Yes, yes, yeah. You spoke about that. I remember we had this conversation in one of our prior interviews where you really went into depth about this membranes and these different levels of consciousness that is involved in the food that we actually consume in the end. And so it isn't something so simplistic. It's actually very elaborate.
And our brain development is turned on by the microbes in our gut. Like our brains do not develop without the proper microbial symbionts. I mean, that's unbelievable. Like we are so
Intertwined. I mean,
intertwined with that with these inner and outer worlds.
well, I think
And
that quote about, that we're more microbes than we are, quote unquote human. And a lot of people don't realize that when they have that kind of wanting to get away from like this whole idea of pesticide and wanting to get away from things, but not realizing that I'm made up of microbes. Yeah,
right.
people don't realize that.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you have any comment to say about synthetic microbes. I mean, I had to always keep bringing in this dark element, but at the same time, we need to be aware that these things are happening. I mean, I know that I recently was learning about even just with probiotics, some of the things that they were using are synthetic, to create the
Yeah.
probiotics. And so if you could speak about that and what do we do? I mean, I always feel that nature can pretty much fix most of what we can do because nature's intelligence is higher than just ordinary, human endeavors here.
Yeah. Well,
Better or worse.
I think we are at a tipping point in terms of that more of the land, more of the whole animal population, et cetera, is sort of human induced than not at this point, right? So there are more
Yeah.
domestic animals than wild animals. And the more that we manage those with technology, with synthetic processes, with genetic modified processes, et cetera, the more diseases we are going to see and the more, what's the word, like,
And we already have seen, I mean, in just
oh,
short
absolutely. But I
time.
mean, they're going to be more subtle. It's not just like an outbreak of avian influenza, right? It's going to be harder and harder to tease apart what part of this
What
was
caused what?
something that was just like a virus that's gone wild and what part of it is something that our own immune system has something in there that is no longer able to even figure it out, right?
Right, because it's
So,
not having that original intelligence, I would
right.
say. It's been distorted.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's where I get concerned is with the things that are mimicking a natural process in a way that is tricking the system. So Fred Provenza writes a lot about the flavor industry. There's a wonderful book called The Dorito Effect.
Oh, okay.
Not by Fred Provenza, but about his work. And then Fred
Okay.
Provenza wrote a longer book called Nourishment. And for example, the
Yeah.
flavor industry is
Oh, yeah.
designed to trick us into thinking that we're getting certain nutrients that we're not.
Right. It's
And it's
really
one of the things that drives our like overeating in this
or
culture
addiction. Yeah.
and addiction.
Yeah.
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 But
Palate addiction.
it's also fooling our system so that the processes that are supposed to unfold in relationship to these molecules that I was talking about are unfolding in ways that cascade off in the wrong direction. So all of the signaling is off.
Well, we
It's
know
like,
that children have really suffered from this. I mean, of course, with fast food and from the 70s on, that was kind of the beginning of that real burgeoning fast food industry,
yeah.
and
And I would say, in terms of that signaling, there's the story of the Tower of Babel, right? It's like we're in a Tower of Babel, like the information, the communication from the soil all the way up to the sky and through our bodies and the bodies of all living things has been messed with. So all of this communication, all of this intelligence, et cetera, is messed with. And that's where I think that's the intervention point that I see as most important right now is understanding how intelligence in a system is supposed to work. Can we at least create a portion of the population that is working at regaining that, et cetera, so that we can kind of have a little,
how to get back to the original blueprint.
And I've seen
level.
this in certain children being raised with like very, very particular broad, organic, nutrient-dense diets. They're like, oh my God, that's what a kid is supposed to be like, right? That
Right.
they're very different than the kind of dulled, addicted, compulsive thing that we're seeing in so many kids and then now, young adults and adults.
Didi, we're going to come right back. We'll take a break now and come right back.
You got me going here.
Talking about, the food system, sterility, fertility, and these topics around the ecosystem.
You're listening to Eco Justice Radio, a listener-supported media outlet. Please consider making a donation to ensure that we can continue to provide socially and environmentally driven content. Donations can be made at ecojusticeradio.org or socal350.org. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon at patreon.com/ecojusticeradio. Today you're listening to Beyond the Financialization of Nature, an Ecology of Care, with host Carrie Kim and guest Didi Pershouse, author, teacher, and founder of the Land and Leadership Initiative.
So, Didi, also, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Casey Means, but I know she was talking about our estrogenic heavy diet and how that has also been affecting children. They become a lot more lethargic. And it's kind of interesting. She was talking kind of about the yin and yang of foods and how we do have this heavy amount of estrogens going into the foods of our children. So.
Yeah, that I mean, I know the concept. I'm not familiar with their work, but yeah.
So
I think there are so many different things leading to that lethargy also. I mean, I do think that the incredible dopamine addiction of repetitive, whether it's with a phone or with a movie or with just like the day, that life, we don't get outside and even look at real living things enough anymore.
Well, it's a challenging thing to consider the generations now that haven't grown up with nature as something primary.
Right.
So that's a big deal I had heard about this farm in Italy where it's to do with addiction and they bring the children back to this farm. I don't know if you know it, don't remember the name, but they're not allowed to have any screens, no cell phones, nothing. They're only connected with nature itself and working kind of every day in nature. How quickly we adapt back to what is original and something that there's a remembrance, in our, whether that's our cellular memory or what you want to call that, but of how we were intended to live here on this earth. But I wonder what you feel, how do we reverse thrust on this kind of Anthropocene impetus to control nature versus align with nature? And now we've distorted nature so much that what is nature anymore on a certain level? In some places, it's like trying to protect what hasn't yet been, disturbed, but there's so much of it that has been. So, but what we know
I don't think we really have places that haven't been disturbed anymore, and disturbance is a funny word because, like I was saying at the beginning,
right. There's some healthy disturbance, but
humans have played a beneficial role, in nature also. So
yes.
It's not that we want, the whole concept of wild or like keeping humans off of land is problematic because there are some great rewilding projects like in the UK and other places, but they're still human managed, right? They're still, it's not just about putting a fence up.
Yeah.
And I mean, personally, I think putting a fence up, that's probably the biggest start of the problem to begin with, is this thing of like, this is my land or this is a place barrier you may not cross. I do believe that we are a migratory species, that for the most part, that's how we evolved, and that there's something that we do moving across the land.
Yeah.
By digging for roots and picking berries and killing a few bison and whatever.
Yeah.
That is part of the whole cycle of life that many, many other animals do. And we're not that unique either, other than our tool use and where we're seeing that. So
yeah, we've interrupted those patterns to a great deal, as you've said.
But I think your question is like, given where we're at, what are the intervention points? Is that I think right now, sort of the best we're going to do, and I think it's a big deal, is creating these oases. So it's like, and Andhra Pradesh is now one of those places that I look at that way.
Where you see the habitat come back and the biodiversity coming back. I mean, that's so inspiring just to have any amount of habitat restoration and seeing nature return. I think that.
And what's cool about how they're doing it is it's not anything to do with keeping humans off of the land. It's that the humans are planting more and more and more diverse plants and more diverse canopy, right? So they're doing agroforestry, and everywhere that they're doing that, then you start to see birds and insects and small mammals that are coming back. And then they're figuring it out for themselves.
Right. And then it can kind of be wild again in that sense,
And that's what they're finding is that they start off having to use these biostimulants and these kind of sort of herbal pest repellents or whatever on some of the plants. And they're finding that after a couple of years of having these diverse landscapes, they don't need any of that. There's just lots of food growing for everyone.
Right, exactly. They hardly have to manage it too, right? I mean, the management becomes virtually,
they're still planting crops and harvesting, but they're not having to do all of that. Like, oh my God, we have to bring in water, or oh my God, we have to kill off this pest, or oh my God, we have to put fertilizer from.
Exactly. Nature's doing the majority of it. I often think about, Walter Yena, the soil microbiologist, and also people like Jeff Lawton, permaculturist, who really talk about how quickly things could be changed and transformed if we actually did all the right things for the soil and the water. And it's very simple, as we know, but there's other forces that kind of keep that. It's not in the mainstream, we know that, but we know the media is not really supporting the restoration that we know is possible. So
and I think there's a lot of confusion, for example, sustainable fuels, including like biomass burning, which means cutting down forests, and a lot of that sustainable fuel of cutting down forests, I've just learned, is being used to smelt the precious metals to make solar panels. If we understood that forests are not just forests, but they're not just a source of carbon, like credits, and they're not just a source of shade, but they're also a source of transpiring water and volatile organic compounds that help to coalesce water in the air and create clouds, and they're a source of the microbes that help to create the clouds, and then that creates That creates these cool, low pressure zones as that water condenses, and that
Mm-hmm.
helps to pull in moisture from the coast. So is that really worth cutting down to make solar panels when we could be, when we could be restoring the climate cycles that
Mm-hmm.
exist
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
previous to deforestation anyway? Like there's
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And even just to see how some of these solar panels, how they're installed, like when you see these fields, these huge amount of, acreage of just solar panels, and we think about, habitat, and we think about migratory patterns of animals, and then you see this very sterile kind of field of solar panels, or wanting to electrify the world. I mean, obviously that's problematic, with the mining
yeah,
of the deep sea and these other things. Everything has a consequence. So,
absolutely.
yeah. Could you describe, because a lot of this can get really dark and heavy and daunting, but we know it's important to continue in our times and to continue laboring for the earth. But could you describe the commons of care of your wildest dreams? What is it? What might it look
That's
like?
a great question. So, I think it does start with children being raised with a deep understanding of and appreciation of the natural ecosystem around them, which means they have to have access. It has to exist, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that they are eating and being raised and their brains developing with this rich microbial and diverse diets
Mm-hmm.
so that everybody's growing up with all of that they need to be able to regulate their emotions and think great
Their
thoughts
nervous systems. Yeah.
instead of nervous
Mm-hmm.
systems that work well, etc. That food is sort of the initial and primary intervention in
Mm-hmm.
most health issues, that medicine is mostly used for the things like car accidents or
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
the things where we
Exactly. Yeah.
need that technology and where we love
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
technology that we
Yeah.
can reattach a limb or help somebody's
Right, right.
heart,
But not the daily sustenance. Yeah,
but
that
not,
comes
but
from the
yeah,
land.
but most of the functional medicine reverts back to, okay, are you getting enough touch? Are you getting enough food? Are you in community, etc., right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
That people are managing land as a bioregional or localized thing that is there. It's not something to own. It's not
mm-hmm.
something to invest
Right.
in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
That it's something that we see ourselves nested within it, not
mm-hmm,
it being something that belongs to us.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And and that we learn that there's so much amazing food that can be grown in these diverse systems. And that when we start growing food that way and relocalizing the food system,
right,
most of the technological needs for that become irrelevant. And you
right.
can grow so much food on a
Yeah.
quarter acre or half acre or
Mm-hmm,
even in a
mm-hmm.
backyard,
Yeah.
if you start thinking about it that way. And it's going to be food that's so much better for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the relationship piece that people learn how to listen to each other. There's a really lovely, lovely children's book I just discovered called The Rabbit Listened that I recommend every adult and every child.
Oh, I love it.
Such a
Well,
great,
listening is a good thing to have, is the capacity to listen. Yeah, especially now.
well, it shows all of the mistakes we make when someone's upset in listening. There's all this
Mm-hmm.
chicken and a bear and all these other creatures
Uh-huh.
kind of do it
Yeah.
wrong. And the rabbit just kind of hangs out and leans up against you and just listens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I do think that is a really important skill to reclaim, is the ability to listen and to not be upset by or perturbed by the things that people need to talk about and say and feel in order to get to clear thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we
Yeah.
assume that what someone says is what they believe, but often we
Mm-hmm.
need to work out a bunch of stuff in order to get to what really is
Mm-hmm.
true for us. And so learning those skills, I think, is really key.
Well, like what you said, we need a restored gut microbiome. We need to have the proper balance of microbes also to be able to listen. I mean, these are the things, like we say, are affecting how we behave in the world. But we
Yeah.
know that, between the
And I think,
autism in children and neurodegenerative disease in the elder. I mean, it's extreme what we
yeah.
have right now.
And I think, you brought up addiction and I think addressing addiction is really key to this, because when we're in this critical time that we're in, I mean, we are in the crisis. It's not in the future. We're in the economic crisis. We're in the climate crisis. We're in the social crisis. We're in the war crisis now.
Health crises. I mean, it's
There's a
stacked upon
really
stack.
strong pull to go to quick fix dopamine, let me feel good now.
Or entertainment,
And
distraction and
that's when I say
escapism.
dopamine, that's what I'm talking.
Yes.
Swiping, scrolling,
Yes. Yes.
binging, whatever it is.
Yes.
And I think that part of what we need to listen to each other about is, I'm a big believer in the 12-step programs. I'm a big believer in some of what's taught in the co-counseling communities. I think that there are groups that have figured out how to listen to each other through crises and help each other process things. I think the somatic work that's being done by many people and groups is amazing. I think we can learn to do that with each other rather than having to, pay for a session. That I know groups that have done that, where it's something that we do to support each other.
Right. It's much of the community health or public health is tied into that community network of having community, actual live in-person community, not on a screen, not on a Zoom. I mean, actually, that energetic is critical to our health, I would say.
You know about the rat city experiment?
No.
So, someone was studying opiate addiction, and, they were doing tests with rats, and they put them in a cage, and, one thing was doling out opium or whatever, heroin.
Okay.
The other was just, water or whatever. And of course they would go to the heroin and get addicted. And then some scientists noticed that the rats were like solitary rats in a cage by themselves with no stimulation. And they said, what would happen if we built Rat Park, I think they call it.
So that could be a community.
And there was community, and they could play. And basically the whole addiction thing went away, right? They weren't that interested in that because they were getting those positive experiences, or those neuro, what are they called? Like the places where the chemicals attached, we're already filled, right?
Yes. Yeah.
We're already filled. So.
Well, it sounds like the pandemic a lot. I mean, we think about the children, how much they suffered by being isolated or not being actually in classroom. And we know that affects us all, actually, when we're relational beings. That's what a human being is, I wonder if you could talk about the invoking change. And so much power now is consolidated financially, politically, but at the same time, the greatest power still remains with nature and the people. So I'm wondering if you feel the most important thing really that we need to do is to continue laboring for the earth locally and in community. Because so much of your work is around community and participation and that engagement. So
yeah, well, I'll say there's a quote that I have in my refrigerator, and I'm sorry I don't know who said it, except that it was the person who spoke when my friend Dane Breslin was getting ordained. So whoever.
Okay, yeah.
And they had a whole series of these, but the one that I caught and wrote down was, do you want to start a revolution, or you want to be a revolutionary? Then pay attention to the humanity of the person in front of you. Attend to the humanity of the person in front of you. And I think that is correct, that remembering that all people are doing the best they can with the circumstances that they grew up in, the information they have, et cetera, the struggles that they have, but also attend to the amazingness of all living things that are right in front of
the
you.
uniqueness.
Walk outside and be like, oh my God, look at that tree, right?
Yeah. Well, remembering that life is actually quite miraculous and wondrous, and that it is important to have that kind of childlike sense of awe in the world. And I think a lot of people are dulled from that, or numb from that, or they're in high stress and they don't get enough sleep. I mean, there's so many things. It's like that life for some people is almost like an assault, instead of just actually experiencing. I wondered about that. Like, what happens? What are the consequences of living life? Also, life as something to solve versus experience.
Yeah.
Just having that. It's kind of like that non-structured playtime that people always say that children and adults needed to, to actually have that. that time to restore ourselves and self-care and all these things. Yeah. Didi, thank you so much for being with us. I wonder if you could share some of the links, how people can learn about all the many offerings that you have and the resources that you provide for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on Substack is probably my most active place right now, and my name is spelled DIDIPERS House, which you'll probably see in the show notes. So if you just search that in Substack, but it's called The Wisdom Underground. And the landandleadership.org is my primary website. And that's where a lot of my work things happen. I do teach courses. Sometimes they're just like little mini classes that happen once every week or so. Sometimes they're longer, 5-week, or we're putting together some 6-month and maybe even year-long courses right now. And I have an ongoing group called the Land and Leadership Development Community that is a phenomenal group of people
all over the globe.
About 30 people. I think you know some of them.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And we, some portion of us gathers every week to work with living systems frameworks and try to really develop our ability to bring to mind realistic images of how the living systems around us actually work, like the real processes, and where are the intervention points that'll make the biggest difference.
Didi, thank you so much for your work, for being here, and you're always bringing the poetry to what we need to do actually in our times, and for the soil sponge, all the work that you do. We're so grateful for your presence and your leadership in that way, community leadership, truly.
Thank you, Carrie. It's great to be with you. I always enjoy our conversation.
Me too. Thank you again.
Thank you to our guest, Didi Pershouse. And thank you to our listeners for joining us. This has been Beyond the Financialization of Nature, an Ecology of Care. For an extended version of this interview, become a member of our Patreon or visit our website at ecojusticeradio.org. Please connect with us on social media at Ecojustice Radio, SoCal350, and Wilder Utopia. If you like what you've heard and you want others to be informed, subscribe and share the episodes. You have been listening to Eco Justice Radio, a project of SoCal 350. Executive producer, myself, Jack Eit. Co-host, Jessica Aldridge. Co-host, Carrie Kim. And engineer and original music by Blake Quake Beats. And until next time, remember, the power is yours.